Her daughter-in-law punched her in the face right outside the pantry. Carolyn West, widow and homeowner of 26 years, didn't scream. Vanessa served dessert like nothing happened. Ryan, her son, said it must have been a cupboard door. By sunrise, Carolyn had packed her suitcase, pulled the deed, and filed a 30-day eviction. She'd hosted every holiday, paid every bill. Now, she was done playing hostess to her own erasure. And when they tried to claim the house, she showed them the receipt with their names missing. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The silverware barely clinked. That's how quiet the dining room had gone. Carolyn sat at the head of her own table, the same cherrywood slab she'd polished every Thanksgiving for over 2 decades. Tonight, the shine wasn't what people noticed, it was the silence. Vanessa's parents, the Jamesons, wore polite, fixed smiles as they chewed their roasted chicken, clearly more accustomed to steak tartare and bone china than Carolyn's southern cooking in ceramic plates. Carolyn reached for the serving spoon and gently adjusted the angle of Vanessa's fork. "Forks face inward on formal settings," she said lightly, almost without thought, like she was brushing lint off someone's shoulder. Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked sideways with a heat that curled. Mr. Jameson chuckled politely. "Charming traditions, Mrs. West. It's Carolyn," she replied with a small nod. "Always Carolyn." Ryan cleared his throat, eyes flicking between his wife and his mother. He looked like a man halfway between a speech and a stomach ulcer. Vanessa took a sip of her wine Pinot Noir. Probably too expensive for the row stand, gave Carolyn a thin-lipped smile. "I'll just top off the bottle," Vanessa said sweetly, already rising. Carolyn knew that look. She rose too. "I'll help." They stepped into the hallway, out of sight but not out of earshot. The soft clink of cutlery and murmured small talk continued in the dining room as Carolyn closed the pantry door with a quiet click. Vanessa spun. "Don't you ever correct me like that again?" "It was a fork," Carolyn said, voice even. "A gentle reminder. That's all. You humiliated me." Carolyn didn't blink. "Then your confidence is thinner than I thought." The blow came fast, not wild, not impulsive measured. A straight punch to the cheekbone. A slap would have been dramatic. This was cold, contained. Pain bloomed hot across Carolyn's face, then pulsed into silence. She didn't cry out. She didn't stagger. She simply stood there, stunned, not by the violence, but by how calm Vanessa looked doing it. "Don't make this a scene in front of my parents," Vanessa hissed. Her breath smelled like wine and roses, sour and sweet. "I swear to God, Carolyn, don't you dare!" Carolyn looked her in the eye for a long, slow moment. Something quiet shifted inside her like a drawer closing, not slamming. Then she nodded, just once. She walked back into the dining room with measured steps, sat her down, smiled. The conversation never stopped, but the warmth had drained from the room like someone pulled the plug. Ryan asked if she was okay, noting the slight red mark rising near her eye. Carolyn said it was a cupboard door. Vanessa refilled glasses like nothing had happened. The Jamesons talked about summering in Charleston and how Ryan should consider a promotion that came with relocation. Carolyn kept chewing, tasting nothing. After dessert key lime pie, made from scratch, Vanessa kissed her in-laws goodbye at the door. Carolyn stood behind her, quiet as a shadow. Mr. Jameson tipped his hat. "Lovely home you've got here, Carolyn." She didn't answer, just nodded again. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Carolyn stood barefoot in her room, bathed in moonlight. The left side of her face ached in pulses. She touched it briefly, then opened the closet and pulled down the worn leather suitcase she hadn't used since her sister's funeral. She moved carefully. No rustling, no creaking boards. From the back of her dresser drawer, she retrieved a small key, then stepped into her walk-in closet and unlocked the hidden floor safe. Inside was a thick manila folder, the original property deed, updated in her name alone, notarized and sealed. She held the paper in her hands for a long moment. It felt heavier than it should have. The house wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't a gift. She'd bought it, brick by brick, while raising Ryan on night shifts and reheated casseroles. This home had seen her grief, her laughter, her long recoveries from quiet losses no one else ever noticed. And now it had seen something else. She set the suitcase on the bed, slowly folded her blouses into neat stacks, and placed the deed on top. The hallway smelled like lemon wood polish and stale perfume Vanessa's signature scent. It clung to the air, defiant and floral, like her presence. But the only sound Carolyn heard was the dull click of her suitcase wheels rolling softly over the hardwood. It was 4:47 a.m. She'd waited. Not for second thoughts, but for silence. The kind of silence you could only trust when even the refrigerator stopped humming. Her bruised cheek, now faintly yellowing at the edges, throbbed under the dim pendant light above the foyer. Carolyn slid the envelope across the entry table like a dealer laying down a final card. Inside were the house keys, the garage remote, the alarm code, every piece of access, surrendered without a word of argument. The envelope read, in her clean script, "I'll be in touch." She didn't leave a forwarding address. Only ghosts left trails that obvious. Carolyn stepped out into the early morning chill, locking the door behind her one last time. The sky above Carrie was the color of cold steel, streaked faintly pink on the horizon. A bird rustled in the magnolia tree, but otherwise the street was still, sleepy. She drove with the windows half down, air cutting across her face like a reset. 15 minutes later, she turned onto the gravel driveway of her late sister's old cottage, the modest, ivy-draped property that had sat waiting ever since Diane passed. Carolyn had never sold it. Didn't need to. And now, she was glad she hadn't. The cottage didn't have the shine or square footage of the main house, but the moment she stepped inside, something inside her unclenched. The smell of old books and cedar drifted in the walls. It didn't ask anything of her. She set her suitcase by the floral love seat and walked straight to the sink, washed her hands, looked up into the mirror above the counter, and studied her face. The bruise had deepened overnight into a dusky bloom like violets under skin. She tilted her head, didn't wince. A knock sounded at the door, 2 quick taps, then one long, "June." Carolyn opened it slowly. June stepped inside, holding a tray with 2 paper cups and a wax bag of still warm biscuits. Her eyes fell on Carolyn's cheek before Carolyn could even open her mouth. June's voice came quiet, but firm. "She hit you." Carolyn didn't nod. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked to the counter, picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and said, "She thought I wouldn't leave." June watched her. She forgot whose name was on the title. They ate in silence. The kind of silence that held weight, not awkwardness, but history. Friendship that didn't need frills. An hour later, Carolyn's phone rang. Todd Baylor. She answered with one word. "Yes?" His voice was all business. "You still hold 100% ownership, right? No joint tenancy, no liens, no transfers?" Carolyn opened the drawer next to her and pulled out the deed again, as if it might have changed overnight. "Everything's in my name. Paid off. Taxes current." "Then we can move forward," Todd said, already scribbling. "I'll prep the forms and send over the filing. You're within your right to remove any unauthorized occupants. Want to proceed with a standard 30-day notice?" Carolyn paused only a beat. "And full authority to remove tenants?" "You have it." The sound of papers sliding across a glass desk should not carry this much weight. But as Todd Baylor handed Carolyn the stamped 30-day notice to vacate, it might as well have been a court summons signed by God himself. 30 days, he said. No loopholes, no extensions unless you give them. Carolyn held the notice like it was a blueprint to a life she hadn't lived in years. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. "I'll drop it off myself." The drive back to the house was short, too short. She parked 2 houses down, walked the rest of the way like a guest. No one waved this time. A jogger slowed, then looked away. The birds were louder here, but her house stood still, too pristine, like a stage set no longer hers. Vanessa was in the garden out front, pruning roses she hadn't planted. Carolyn stepped through the gate with the crisp, white envelope in hand. Vanessa looked up and instantly, her mouth curled with suspicion. "You're trespassing." Carolyn ignored the bait. "This is official. 30-day notice to vacate. Legally backed, fully enforceable. You'll see the signatures." Vanessa snatched the envelope like it insulted her. "This is your family home, Carolyn." Carolyn's gaze didn't waver. "It's not a home if it houses silence." Vanessa blinked, as if struck with a word instead of a fist. Ryan appeared on the porch, half-dressed, still in socks. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching his mother and his wife. He didn't come down. He didn't stop her. Carolyn turned and walked away without another word. The gate clicked softly behind her. That afternoon, June showed up at the cottage with her laptop and a bottle of root beer. Time to do some digital pruning, she announced. They sat on the porch, surrounded by budding gardenias and the gentle hum of bees. One by one, Carolyn called each utility companion electric, water, gas, internet. June handled the passwords. Carolyn handled the tone. No, Carolyn told the third representative. They do not have permission to access this account. Remove their user privileges immediately. Each click of confirmation felt like pulling a nail from the cross she'd been tied to. Our face. By the end of the week, the neighborhood buzzed louder than the bees. Carolyn could feel the tension thickening in the air at Harris Teeter and in the church parking lot. People nodded to her more slowly, spoke more cautiously. One even pulled her aside after Sunday service and whispered, "Is it true what they're saying?" Carolyn only replied, "Depends who's talking." Our face. Then came the letter certified, thick, embossed with gold leaf trim. From Mr. and Mrs. Jameson, addressed not to Carolyn but to the owners of the West family residence. Inside, a formal request for mediation, citing confusion over implied shared residence and mutual investment in the domestic property. June read it twice. They talk like it's Downton Abbey. All that's missing is a wax seal. They're not confused, Carolyn said, sliding the letter into a manila folder. They're staking a claim. June raised a brow. Think Ryan tipped them off? Carolyn's expression didn't move, but her silence was louder than denial. "Are calm," Todd called that evening. "We've got movement." From who? The Jamesons. They're trying to claim Vanessa has partial ownership through marital cohabitation, which frankless nonsense. But if they push this, we'll need to be airtight. Carolyn looked out the window, toward the dark silhouette of the house she once filled with warmth. She could almost see the kitchen light still on. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Receipts, deed, history, utility statements. Anything that shows they've been tenants, nothing more." The manila folders thudded onto Todd Baylor's glass desk like stacked evidence in a crime drama. Only this wasn't television. This was decades of Carolyn's meticulousness being weaponized for the first time. She didn't sit right away, just stood there as Todd opened the top file, eyes scanning. "Title history," she said flatly. "Paid in full 26 years ago. All property taxes, maintenance, and structural upgrades fully documented. Not a cent from her." Todd flipped through color-coded tabs: blue for mortgage closure, green for renovation invoices, yellow for property tax receipts. He let out a low whistle. "Carolyn, you don't keep records. You keep archives." She finally sat. "It wasn't for them. I just don't throw things away when they still speak the truth." Todd pulled out a stapled packet contractor estimates from the bathroom remodel, the kitchen extension, even the new roof from 5 years ago. All signed by Carolyn. All paid from her account. "What about utilities?" he asked. "Already stripped their access," Carolyn said. "June helped. They never once paid a bill under their name. I have every statement since 2010. Todd nodded slowly, eyes narrowing with each document he flipped. No shared assets, no gift deeds, no joint tenancy claims. This isn't a case. It's a clean break. "Not to them," she replied. "To them, it's entitlement wrapped in etiquette." He paused. "You'll want to keep a copy of everything on a flash drive, just in case." Carolyn reached into her handbag and placed one on the desk. Todd raised an eyebrow. "You're 2 steps ahead. I didn't come to lose." Our face. Back at the cottage, sunlight angled through the lace curtains and lit up dust motes floating through the air. The room smelled faintly of lavender and printer ink. Carolyn had spent the afternoon scanning every receipt she couldn't bear to part with. Halfway through organizing, she opened her old phonione she hadn't used in years but kept charged in the kitchen drawer. Within a few minutes of digging, she found them. Texts from Vanessa. Old ones. Passive-aggressive complaints sent years ago during a fight with Ryan. "Tell your son to pick up his laundry in your house. I'm tired of pretending this is my home when everyone knows it's Carolyn's. You're lucky I let you walk around like you still run the place." Carolyn read them with the same look she used to give splinter-small irritants that could fester if ignored. Now they were leverage. She saved screenshots and sent them straight to Todd. Add these to the folder. Verbal acknowledgement of property ownership from Vanessa herself. A knock came at the door. This time, not June. Carolyn opened it to find Ryan standing alone, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes darting between the steps and her face. "Can we talk?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was clear and flint-edged. "If you came to defend her, you've come to the wrong door." Ryan's shoulders sank. "I didn't." Silence again. He looked down at his shoes, scuffed at the toe, the way he used to when he got in trouble as a boy. Only now he was a man, one with a family, one with secrets. "I came," he said slowly, "because she hit Talia too." Ryan didn't sit. He just stood there, framed in the doorway like a child returning to a house he no longer recognized. "I didn't know who else to tell," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She slapped Talia across the face. "I didn't see it happen, but Talia told me. She wouldn't lie. Not about this." Carolyn's chest went still. It wasn't shock. It was something older, quieter, heavier grief made of guilt. "When?" she asked. "Last week. After the dinner. Talia spilled juice on the rug and—" Ryan swallowed hard. "Vanessa said she was just disciplining. But her cheek was red, Mom. Bright red. The same color Carolyn's had been." Ryan sat now, head in his hands. The room fell silent except for the tick of the cottage wall clock, its steady beat slicing the stillness into fractions. "I should have done something sooner," he mumbled. Carolyn sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, the bones of her knuckles white. "No," she said quietly. "I should have." Ryan looked up, confused. "She hit me too," Carolyn said. "And I said nothing. Walked back to that table like a ghost. I thought I was protecting peace, but it was just silence dressed as surrender." Ryan said nothing. His eyes glassed over. "Is Talia safe tonight?" she asked. "She's with Vanessa's parents," he muttered. "They don't know. They think Vanessa's just stressed." Carolyn rose, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a slim folder she had tucked away after her last meeting with Todd. "She's not stressed, Ryan. She's dangerous. A Vester." By noon, Carolyn was in Todd Baylor's office again, this time sitting stiff-backed with urgency bleeding through every breath. Todd leaned forward. "We already have a case built around property rights. You want to escalate this?" "Yes," she said. "I want a protective clause added, one that includes my granddaughter. If she's in that house, she's at risk. And if Vanessa files anything retaliatory, I want it on record that we anticipated it." Todd gave a single nod. "We'll strengthen the language. Frame it as a safety issue. Because it is." He adjusted his tie. "And Ryan?" "He'll come around," Carolyn said, though her voice flickered with uncertainty. A Vester. That night, back at the cottage, June arrived carrying a bag of pot roast and cornbread like armor. "I heard from Celia down at the hardware store," she said, plopping into the armchair. "Vanessa's been asking around for a new real estate lawyer. Sounds like the heat's turning up." Carolyn stirred sugar into her tea. "She'll do what people like her always hide behind performance until the curtain falls." June studied her for a beat. "You're not burning a house down, you know." Carolyn looked over, brow furrowed. "You're making room for oxygen," June said. "Big difference." Carolyn smiled then, small and sad. "Feels like I'm lighting a match either way." A Vester. Later that week, Ryan stood in her doorway, again same posture, same hesitation. Carolyn held the door open longer this time. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said gently. "But if you need somewhere else to be—" He glanced at the cottage walls, then toward the small bedroom down the hall, freshly painted and waiting. "I don't know if I'm ready," he whispered. "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to be done pretending she is." He didn't come inside, but he didn't walk away either. A Vester. The following morning, Carolyn's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A clipped, rehearsed voice greeted her. "This is Officer Ellis with Wake County Court Services. Vanessa West has filed a temporary restraining order claiming emotional abuse and unlawful interference with her residence." Carolyn stared at the mug in her hand. The steam no longer rose. "Noted," she said. "What's the next step?" "There will be a preliminary review. If denied, a court date will still be scheduled for your current filing." 2 hours later, Todd called. The restraining order didn't stick, he said. Judge saw right through it. Denied. Carolyn exhaled, slow and silent. Todd's voice sharpened. But he did schedule something else. It started with the mail carrier. She paused at the gate of Carolyn's cottage, squinting at the envelope in her hand, then said, almost under her breath, "Thought you still lived up on Winslow." Carolyn met her eyes without flinching. Not anymore. 2 days later, a woman from the church choir dropped off banana bread wrapped in wax paper and asked nothing, just said, "You ever need help with the garden, you holler." Then, at the next church brunch, June did what June always did, best spread truth under the cover of polite conversation. "I'm just saying," she said, cutting into a scone. "If someone punched my best friend in the face over a dinner plate, I'd be living somewhere safer, too." The table stilled. Forks hovered. One woman actually gasped. June popped the bite in her mouth. Blueberry. And that was all it took. By the following weekend, the whispers had shifted zip codes. What had begun as shock, she left her own house, turned to speculation. Was there abuse? And finally, alliance. Carolyn noticed it first during a walk through the local park. A couple from 3 streets over slowed their pace to walk beside her. Asked how she was holding up. Didn't pry. Just offered presents. Later that day, a teenager rang the doorbell and handed her a foil-covered tray of baked ziti. "My mom said you probably haven't cooked much lately. She made this in case." Carolyn thanked him, closed the door, let herself cry exactly 3 seconds before wiping her face and placing the dish in the fridge like nothing happened. The next morning, the cottage's quiet was shattered. Vanessa, pounding on the front door like she was owed the wood under her knuckles. "Open up, Carolyn!" she screamed. "You think you can run me out of my own family? This is your fault? You've always been—" Carolyn didn't open the door. She didn't raise her voice. She turned on her phone's camera, hit record, stepped back and waited. Vanessa circled to the side of the house, screaming now, words splintered with rage. "You're poisoning Ryan against me, against his own daughter. You sick, bitter old." Then came the scratching, something sharp against the window pane. Carolyn simply filmed. When Vanessa finally drove off in a storm of gravel and engine roar, Carolyn uploaded the video to her secure folder. Then she sent a copy to Todd. By that afternoon, the harassment notice had been filed. "Clear and clean," Todd said over the phone. "She trespassed. You remained calm. This video will speak louder than any accusation she's tried to hurl. You're building something most people don't know how to." "What's that?" Carolyn asked. "A long game," Todd replied. "It's rare to see someone so quiet play it this well." She said nothing in response, but her silence felt like strategy, not surrender. That evening, as the sun began to bleed down over the rooftops, Carolyn stepped outside to check her mailbox. A plain manila envelope sat in Cedino postage, no return address. She opened it right there under the porch light. Inside, a flash drive. Taped to the plastic was a yellow post-it note with a single sentence. "You might need this." Carolyn walked back inside, slid the flash drive into her laptop, and clicked. The screen flickered. A grainy image filled the screen her front hallway from a different angle. Vanessa. The punch. Caught cleanly. Deliberate. Unmistakable. Carolyn watched the video again not to feel anything, but to confirm what she already knew. Vanessa's hand moved with the certainty of someone who'd struck before. No hesitation, no fear of consequence. The camera angle from the neighbor's doorbell cropped just enough to give context, clear enough to damn her captured it all. The narrow hallway, Carolyn's profile, and then the sudden blow, the shove, the hissed warning. "Don't make this a scene in front of my parents." Todd watched it next. No sound in his office except the occasional tap of his pen against the desk. When the screen finally went black, he exhaled. Well, that's the ball game. Carolyn sat still, her hands folded in her lap. "We use it? We hold it," he said. "For now. But it gives us more than leverage, gives us time. I can file for expedited removal. Judges don't take kindly to violence caught on camera." She nodded slowly. "Label it, if needed." Todd raised an eyebrow. "Not going public?" "Number. That's what she would do." Back at the cottage, the air was heavy with the scent of late-blooming honeysuckle. Carolyn had begun pulling weeds again, her quiet meditation, and in the rustle of dry leaves and soil, she found the stillness she needed to breathe. That afternoon, Ryan came by. Carolyn had the laptop open on the kitchen table. She didn't say a word, just hit play. Ryan didn't sit. He didn't blink. He just watched. When it ended, he stepped back like he'd been punched himself. "I didn't know," he said softly, voice cracking. "You looked away," Carolyn replied. He wiped his face with both hands. "She told me I was overreacting. She said it wasn't what it looked like. Abusers never tell you the truth. They tell you stories with just enough sugar to hide the poison." He stood there for a long time, then finally sank into the kitchen chair. "Talia deserves better than this." "She still can have better," Carolyn said, reaching for his hand. "But it'll take choices, not just wishes." The next morning, Carolyn found a folded piece of paper left at the doorstep. Crayon, stick figures, a house with flowers lining the walkway, big sun in the corner, yellow rays reaching every edge. Beneath it, in a child's wobbly print, "Grandma's house feels safe," signed, Talia. Carolyn framed it that day and hung it above the entryway. With the court date approaching, Carolyn threw herself into the garden. She tilled the soil, laid down new mulch, planted sunflowers even though it was late in the season. "You always used to say they follow the light," June remarked, dropping off a flat of marigolds. "They do," Carolyn said, brushing dirt from her palms. "No matter how many times they've been trampled." The backyard began to come alive again. Not with noise, but with presence. Bees, butterflies, a little patch of joy growing stubbornly in silence. She was pruning the rosebush when the phone rang. Unknown number. She answered with her usual reserve. Carolyn West. A pause, then a professional voice, male and measured. "This is Miles Dorsey, legal counsel for Vanessa West. My client would like to offer a settlement." Carolyn stood still in her garden gloves, the thorns brushing against her arm. "Go on," she said. Next day, the email came wrapped in politeness, lined with faux professionalism and stinking of desperation. Carolyn opened the attached PDF at her kitchen table. The header read like a peace treaty: "Proposal for property reconciliation and shared ownership agreement." The number sat dead center on the page, $20,000. In exchange, Carolyn would transfer 50% of the home's ownership to Vanessa West. She didn't scoff. She didn't curse. She stood, poured herself a fresh cup of black coffee, and opened the window. The morning breeze carried honeysuckle and the faint scent of newly turned soil from her garden. It was more honest than anything in that document. June arrived minutes later, as if summoned by instinct. "Got your text. What's she trying now? Offer you monogrammed stationery and call it forgiveness?" Carolyn handed her the printed offer. June scanned it once, then again, then laughed without humor. "This isn't a settlement, it's a bribe with paperwork." She held it up like it might catch fire from her glare. 20 grand? To sell her half the soul of your life? You could get that from selling the garage door. Carolyn set a pen and a single sheet of her own stationery on the table. "Help me draft the refusal." By noon, the reply was signed, scanned, and sent simple. Clear, with no emotion to soften the blow. "I decline your offer in full. I retain sole ownership of the property. All legal actions will proceed as filed. Carolyn West." Todd responded minutes later. "Good. That was never an offer. That was bait," Carolyn replied. "File to expedite the sale." The next morning, Carolyn and Todd met in his office. She signed a formal letter of intent. The house would go on the market the week after the eviction hearing. Cash buyers only. No contingencies. No loopholes. And with a steady voice, she added a clause. A portion of the proceeds would go to a local nonprofit that supported women displaced by family violence. Todd looked up, pen paused. "That's your plan?" She nodded once. "That house won't just give me freedom. It'll give someone else a start." For a beat, Todd said nothing. Then he simply said, "I'll make sure the paperwork sings." Later that afternoon, Talia was dropped off by Ryan, who lingered in the car while Carolyn and his daughter played in the garden. The girl's fingers were covered in dirt, her small face tilted toward the sun. "Why does it feel quieter here?" she asked, brushing soil off her knees. Carolyn handed her a small watering can. "Because some places remember how to breathe." Talia looked around, then whispered like it was a secret. It feels like nothing bad can get inside. Carolyn smiled at that. It can try, but we've made the walls thick with good. That evening, as the light slipped past the curtains, Carolyn reached for an old journal she hadn't opened in over a decade. It was tucked on a shelf, spine faded, corners curled with age. She flipped through pages filled with long-past grocery lists, scribbled hopes, and sketches of paint swatches. Near the front, a single line caught her eye written in her own looping hand, dated the day she closed on the house. Only love can live here. She stared at the words as if they belonged to someone else, someone younger and unscarred. Then she closed the journal gently and whispered, "Time to make that true again." The courtroom smelled of laminate and nerves. Carolyn sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, wearing a simple navy blazer and flat shoes. No jewelry, no makeup, just presence. Vanessa, seated across from her, had dressed like a senator's wife-ivory blazer, a silk blouse, and pearls that glinted under the fluorescent lights like they had something to say. Her posture was immaculate, her expression rehearsed, but her hands kept fiddling with the clasp of her handbag tug. Click, release. The bailiff called order. Judge Halford entered late 40s, salt and pepper beard, no patience for theatrics. Todd leaned in beside Carolyn and whispered, "Stay still. Let the case do the work." She gave the faintest nod. The hearing began. Vanessa's attorney stood first. He opened with a tone full of concern and practiced disappointment. "My client has been emotionally destabilized, forced from the home she's nurtured as a wife and mother for nearly 10 years. Carolyn didn't flinch, but she counted each falsehood like steps down a dark hallway. Made to feel unsafe by her former mother, in-laws' sudden aggression, and attempts to sever familial unity. Vanessa dabbed beneath one eye with a tissue. Nothing wet came away. Todd rose next. His voice was cool, measured. "Your Honor, this is not a case of family hardship. This is a case of ownership, abuse, and legal rights deliberately violated." He submitted the documents one by one. The deed, the utility records, the receipts. Then without fanfare, he introduced the video. Judge Halford requested to view it privately in chambers. "Both counsels will wait." The room sat in strained silence for 12 minutes. Vanessa tried to meet Carolyn's gaze. Carolyn stared straight ahead, expression unreadable, her breath deep and even. When the judge returned, his eyes no longer scanned the room, they pierced it. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't request a word more from either party. "The footage submitted is clear, corroborated, and damning," he began. "There is no legal basis for partial ownership. The respondent contributed nothing financially or contractually to this property." Vanessa blinked once, twice. Her attorney shifted in his seat. The judge continued, now looking at Carolyn. "Full authority and ownership of the property remains with Miss West. The court hereby orders the immediate removal of all unauthorized residents within 21 days. Gasps stirred in the gallery. June, seated 2 rows back, exhaled a breath she'd apparently been holding for weeks. The judge glanced back at Vanessa. "And any future claims of equity or abuse made without new material evidence will be dismissed with prejudice." The gavel hit wood. Hollow. Final. Carolyn stood slowly, collecting her folder and coat. She felt Ryan move up beside her. "Thank you for standing up there," she said without turning. "She made me feel like I had no choice," Ryan replied softly. "You reminded me I did?" Across the courtroom, Vanessa rose robotically. No tears now, just tight fury in the corners of her mouth. She didn't look back. Not at Ryan, not at Carolyn. She exited the courtroom like a ghost being evicted from her own story. That evening, Carolyn returned to the cottage alone. The sun was low, painting the kitchen walls in warm gold. She poured herself a glass of sweet tea, sat at the table, and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard just a second before she began typing. Listing title: 4, bedroom, 3, bath family home. Available immediately, showings begin Friday. She hit publish. In that moment, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her chestnut joy. Not revenge. Something quieter, like balance. The offer came at 11:42 p.m., full cash, no contingencies, ready to close in 14 days. Carolyn stared at the email, the glowing digits of her kitchen clock blinking in rhythm with her pulse. Not a word from Vanessa since the hearing. Just this offer. Quiet. Clean. Final. She replied with one line. Accept. Proceed to escrow. Then closed the laptop, poured herself a splash of bourbon, and let the silence settle around her like a blanket that finally fit. June showed up the next morning with a roll of packing tape, 2 lattes, and 0 patience. You waited 20 years to be free of that woman. We are not half-packing like amateurs. The house Carolyn's house wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a while, but the attic still smelled like the 1990s. Insulation, pine dust, old boxes, and the quiet hum of things forgotten. They sifted through ornaments and water-stained cookbooks. Carolyn kept only what had breath left in it. A hand-stitched quilt, a ceramic vase Ryan made in 2nd grade, and a tin of faded letters from her sister. Found this, June called out from the corner, holding up a small wooden drawer she'd pried open with a butter knife. Locked. Guess what was inside? She handed it to Carolyn like a gift. Inside, wrapped in a thin plastic sleeve, was a photo. Ryan may be 11 standing in front of the newly bought house, gap-toothed, grinning, one arm thrown around Carolyn's waist. He was holding a sold sign like a trophy. The date scribbled on the back read, the 15th of March, 2001. Carolyn stared at it long enough to feel her chest tighten. That boy didn't know he'd live inside a story someone else would try to rewrite. June squeezed her arm. But now he knows who wrote the first chapter. Carolyn hired a local moving crew. She didn't lift a single box, didn't need to. Her only job was to walk behind the men as they carried her memories out in cardboard and padded blankets, then lock the door behind them for good. The final item they loaded was a worn rocking chair, the one that once sat by the nursery window where Talia had napped. Carolyn watched them drive off with it, eyes dry but steady. Oak? At the cottage, Talia arrived the next afternoon with Ryan. Her curls were wild from the wind, her cheeks pink from running up the garden path. She darted inside before anyone could knock. "Grandma!" she yelled, wrapping her arms around Carolyn's waist. "Your house smells like cookies!" Carolyn knelt. "That's because we made peace here, baby girl. Peace always smells better than drama." Talia giggled and pulled a stick figure drawing from her backpack. "This is you and me and Daddy. See? This is your house now, not the big one." Carolyn looked at the crayon lines and felt something new stir inside her. Not just relief. Legacy. She folded the drawing carefully. "You think this house feels safe again?" Talia nodded with conviction. Safer than anything. Oak? That night, Carolyn stood by the kitchen window, the soft thrum of June washing dishes behind her. The world was finally still, until her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered out of instinct, voice low. Carolyn West. There was no greeting, just quiet on the other end. She listened. Nothing. Just the faint sound of breathe-erratic, unsteady. Then a choked sob. Vanessa. No rage. No threats, just silence, twisted into something broken. Carolyn didn't hang up. Didn't speak either. She simply let the silence stretch like a mirror between them. The voicemail came at 3:08 a.m. Carolyn didn't listen to it right away. She let the icon sit there like a blinking question she had no interest in answering. But when the house was quiet, and the kettle was warming for her tea, she pressed play. "Carolyn!" Vanessa's voice trembled. Not weak, just raw, as if rehearsed too many times and then dropped all at once. I don't know how everything got so far. I know I've said things, done things. Look, I'm not asking for anything. Ryan won't talk to me. You win, okay?" A long pause, then quieter. "I miss my daughter. Please, I'm still her mother." Carolyn hit delete. Not out of spite but clarity. Some doors don't slam shut. They fade until they're no longer doors, just walls where light used to be. Out? Later that week, Ryan knocked gently on her screen door. He didn't need to say anything. Carolyn saw the manila envelope in his hand, the legal crest stamped in the corner. "I filed this morning," he said, setting it on the table. "Divorce. Custody petitions in there, too." She gave a slow nod, then gestured toward the kettle. "You want coffee or something stronger?" "Both," he muttered, cracking a smile for the first time in days. Oat? The rental house was just 5 streets away. Neutral beige walls, old carpet, creaky but honest. Carolyn stood in the smallest bedroom, arms crossed as she and Ryan surveyed it together. Talia's new room. We could paint it yellow, he said, measuring the walls with his hands. Or that sky blue she likes. Put stars on the ceiling. Carolyn walked to the window, sunlight spilling onto the bare floorboards. Sunflowers along the baseboards, she said. So the walls don't forget to grow up. Ryan looked at her. You sure you're okay helping with this? She turned to him, voice steady. I spent too long holding silence. This is me building sound. Oak? Carolyn's first therapy session wasn't filled with tears. It was filled with stillness, the kind that had always made her uncomfortable. But when the therapist asked, when did you first stop feeling safe in your own home? The answer came faster than she expected. Probably the day I started calling it mine, but let other people define it. She didn't cry, but she did go back the next week. And the week after that, Oak? June came by with a gift a few days later. A carved wooden plaque, wrapped in brown paper and tied with gardening twine. Carolyn unwrapped it on the porch. The grain was warm and dark. The words burned in bold script. Not bitter, just built better. I figured it was more accurate than anything you'd find on a Hallmark card, June said, sipping her lemonade. Carolyn ran a hand across the letters. You always know what to bring. Wisdom and wood. That's all I've got left. They laughed, but the air between them stayed soft, earned. Oak? The letter arrived the next afternoon. White envelope. Registered mail. Legal return address. Carolyn sliced it open without drama. Read the heading. Notice of civil claim. Allegations of emotional damages. Plaintiff. Vanessa West. Defendant. Carolyn West. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breath didn't change. She simply closed the folder, picked up her phone, and called Todd. The envelope was bold but brittle like the woman who sent it. Carolyn handed the complaint to Todd over his conference table without so much as a sigh. Emotional distress, she said. Apparently, I'm the root of her spiritual crisis. Todd didn't even bother with gloves this time. He flipped open the claim with all the ceremony of someone scanning a dinner receipt. No photos, no medical records, no eyewitnesses, no police report, he muttered. Just language. Carolyn leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. She always thought performance was proof. Todd pulled out a manila folder, thicker, heavier, and marked countermaterials, West versus West. Then let's give the court something real. Over the next 2 days, Todd compiled their response. Video footage. Vanessa striking Carolyn date. Stamped, time, coded, and verified. Text messages. Vanessa referring to the house as Carolyn's, blaming her for not letting go of her space. Medical records. Carolyn's urgent care visit after the punch-documented bruising, soft tissue trauma. Affidavits. From June. From neighbors. From Ryan. On the second morning, Todd called with an edge in his voice. Her lawyer just requested a private withdrawal. Carolyn blinked. He's dropping the case? Not a public dismissal. Not even pushing for settlement. Just backing away with his tail tucked. What about her? Todd's voice cooled. She hasn't said a word. Carolyn stared out her cottage window, where sunlight danced across the hydrangeas. Let's make sure she never gets another chance. R2. That afternoon, Carolyn returned to the courthouse same hallways, same bleached tile boot, this time with intention. She filed a formal restraining order. Permanent. For herself. And a mirrored clause protecting Talia. When the clerk asked if she wanted to serve it immediately, Carolyn said, yes, no delays. She doesn't get to breathe into this life again. She walked out with paperwork in hand and a feeling in her chest like clarity. It wasn't vengeance. It was vacuum. Clean. Final. R2. Later that week, Talia was curled on the cottage rug, coloring quietly with a pink crayon that had been worn down to a nub. She looked up at Carolyn without prompt and asked, can I call this my home base? Carolyn blinked. What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy says we live at the other house now, but this place feels like where we come back to, like a middle. Carolyn knelt beside her, brushing hair from her forehead. You can call this anything you want. Talia smiled and went back to her coloring. Carolyn watched her for a long time, realizing that what she had built quietly, stone by stone, was already sheltering more than one person. R2. Ryan was adapting too. He started cooking dinner 3 times a week, nothing fancy, but meals with stories behind them. Spaghetti like Carolyn used to make. Grilled cheese with tomato soup when he was feeling low. He downloaded a co-parenting app, took a parenting class online, and got a part-time therapist who specialized in high-conflict separations. At first, it looked like survival, but then it started looking like growth. "You're doing it," Carolyn told him one Sunday morning as he wiped syrup off Talia's face. "You're building something steady." Ryan looked over his shoulder. Quiet, but sure. "I just want her to know we're not waiting on someone to change anymore." Carolyn nodded. "Neither am I." R2. A week later, her phone buzzed with a notification from her inbox. Subject: Nonprofit registration approval. Wake County Clerk. Status: accepted. Tax: exempt designation. 501. 3. Name: The Second Key Initiative. Carolyn sat down on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen. Not just accepted, approved, official, alive. She picked up her phone and called June. "It's happening," she said. "The nonprofit?" June asked. "You're in?" Carolyn's voice was steady. "We're going to house women. Women like me. Like Talia. Like the ones nobody notices until they disappear into their bruises." June went quiet on the line. Then softly, "So, what do we do next?" Carolyn smiled. "We find the first key. And we open a second door." The key weighed less than she thought it would. Carolyn turned it over in her palm small. Brass, still warm from the realtor's hand. The first house of the Second Key Initiative sat in front of her, its shutters flaked, porch sagging slightly, but the bones were solid. It had been abandoned for 2 years, foreclosed and forgotten, until the nonprofit's funds hit her account. Now, it was a beginning. Carolyn slipped the key into the lock and turned. It clicked clean, mechanical, final. She didn't smile. She inhaled. The scent of musty wood, stale air, and old dust hit her all at once. But beneath it, she imagined what it would soon hold: sage, lemon oil, and the quiet breath of someone sleeping safely for the first time in weeks. R2. They named it together over tea. Carolyn, June, and a woman named Letitia from the Board of Housing Services. "Why Second Key?" Letitia asked. "Because the first key is survival," Carolyn said, stirring her honey. "The second one opens the door you choose next." June raised her mug. "To doors you don't have to knock on twice." They clinked cups, soft and sure. R2. The first house was funded in full-in anonymous match from a private donor. June side-eyed Carolyn across the porch one morning. "Let me guess. Rhymes with Brian." Carolyn didn't answer, just kept watering the potted ferns near the steps. The second house came easier than expected. The story had begun to ripple through Wake County quietly at first, then louder like a song hummed across fences. Women started reaching out, some by email, some through church, some who walked up to Carolyn in the grocery store, looked her in the eye, and said nothing, only rolled up a sleeve or pulled down a collar to show her what they couldn't say aloud. One woman, barely 30, arrived with a black eye and a daughter clinging to her side. Carolyn didn't ask what happened. She just handed her the key. "I'm May." Talia came with Ryan every Saturday now. She'd started calling the cottage Grandma Base, and this weekend she brought her backpack full of acrylics and sponges. Carolyn had asked her to help paint the nursery wall of the first shelter house. Talia dipped a sponge into sky blue, then pressed it gently against the drywall. "What should we put here?" Carolyn crouched beside her. "Something you'd want to see if you were scared." Talia thought for a beat, then began painting. By the end of the day, the mural showed a giant yellow sun, a window wide open, and words painted in careful, uneven brushstrokes. "Safe is a room that sees you." Carolyn took a photo, printed it, framed it on the wall. "I'm May." By mid-month, a local journalist from the Cary Ledger requested an interview. Carolyn met him at the first house, standing in front of the porch with her arms crossed, wind lifting the hem of her sweater. He asked about trauma, about transformation, about what it cost her to burn everything down. She didn't give him what he came for. "I didn't burn anything," she said calmly. "I just stopped handing matches to people who like watching women disappear." The story went live that Friday. It spread faster than Carolyn expected, shared across social media, picked up by local news stations, and reposted with hashtags she didn't recognize. By Sunday, she had 3 new donor offers. and a voicemail from a mayor's office assistant who wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. In May. That evening, after Talia had fallen asleep on the couch with a crayon still in her hand, Carolyn stepped onto the porch to find a small bouquet on the swing. White tulips, sunflowers, and rosemary her favorite. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. She unfolded it, breath catching slightly. You made a home for her. And for me, I'll never forget that. No signature. Just a folded edge. She didn't need one. Next day, Carolyn received a letter. The envelope was heavy, thicker than it needed to be, as if Vanessa had tried to make the paper feel important just by forcing more of it in. No return address, but Carolyn knew the handwriting. That too neat cursive, always trying too hard to be elegant. She opened it at the kitchen table with scissors. No ceremony, no expectations. The letter stretched across 3 pages. No apology, not a single ounce of reflection or remorse, just a litany of complaints. You poisoned Ryan against me. You overstepped. You cost me everything. It read more like a performance review than a goodbye, angry, sterile, desperate for a dignity it hadn't earned. Carolyn read it once, folded it again, then walked it to the back porch where the fire pit sat unused since last fall. She lit the letter with a match, watched the flame crawl greedily up the edge, curling the ink into memoryless ash. It took less than a minute. She didn't blink. I'm dying. That night, with the house quiet and the air thick with the scent of chamomile, Carolyn sat down with a fresh sheet of paper. No one would read this letter. Not even June. Not Ryan. Not Talia. It was for her. She wrote slowly, carefully, like laying bricks across a ravine she'd once fallen into. You remembered who you were without being told. You stopped performing pain for people who ignored it. You found your voice not by raising it, but by anchoring it. And when they tried to write you out, you built the page they couldn't erase. When she was finished, she folded it once and placed it inside a hardcover book on her nightstand, an old copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God she hadn't opened in years. She didn't need to reread it to remember how it ended. Amen. June came over with wine the next night and found the letter in the book by accident. She read it aloud in Carolyn's living room, voice low and reverent. You remembered who you were without being told, she repeated, her throat tight. Damn, girl. That's not a letter. That's an anthem. Carolyn chuckled, sipped her wine. It's not for them. It's for what's left of me. June raised her glass. Then here's to the you that's still building. I'm May. A week later, the nonprofit received its first state-level recognition. A letter from the Office of Community Affairs arrived with a stamped seal and congratulations. Second Key Initiative had been selected for the regional Impact Roots Granta title. Carolyn found both ironic and perfect. They would be featured in a spring documentary series. 3 more homes were already in progress. Donations had tripled in a month. Still, none of that made her cry. It was the email from a social worker who wrote, Your homes are the only places my clients ask to return to. Carolyn closed her laptop and let the tears come without shame. End classed. The cottage was fully hers now. Every window washed, every corner reclaimed. The garden had grown bold hydrangeas spilling over their planters, marigolds defiant in their color. Inside, she'd repainted every wall. Warm whites, moss green in the kitchen, lavender in the guest room where Talia often fell asleep with a book still in her lap. Carolyn walked through the space that night barefoot, letting the floor creak under her steps like a voice finally clearing its throat. She paused at the fridge to hang up one of Talia's new drawings, a house with flowers, a family, and a giant yellow heart in the sky. Taped beside it was a new note. She hadn't seen it earlier. Crayon, block letters, no punctuation. You're not just my grandma, you're my example. Laughter floated through the cottage like music with no source. It came from the kitchen 12 women washing dishes and whispering jokes. From the hallway a toddler running in socked feet, arms flailing in pure joy. From the backyard an older girl braiding her sister's hair beneath the dogwood tree. There was no chaos, no shouting, no doors slamming. Just presence, just breath. Carolyn stood by the window, one hand wrapped around a warm mug, the other gently cradling a sunflower plucked from the garden that morning. Her knees ached, the way they always did when the weather shifted. But the ache was honest, earned. 1 year, 12 months since the final court order, since Vanessa disappeared out of state with a lawyer and a lease in Florida. 12 months since Carolyn had reclaimed her voice without ever raising it. End classed. The main house, the first of the 5 under the Second Key Initiative, stood proudly at the edge of the property line now. Newly painted shutters, raised garden beds, a playground donated by a local school board. The sun caught the gleam of its fresh white siding like it was always meant to shine. Just beneath the cornerstone, barely visible unless you looked closely, were the etched words, "In honor of Carolyn West, for the silence she broke." She hadn't asked for it. Hadn't even known until June dragged her out one Saturday morning to inspect the tulips and pointed with teary eyes. "People need to remember who taught them quiet doesn't mean weak," June had whispered, her fingers tracing the engraving. Carolyn had said nothing, only nodded. End classed. Ryan and Talia visited every Sunday. It had become ritual, fresh biscuits, porch swing time, and a walk through the garden where Talia now insisted on picking the week's bouquet for her teacher. Ryan was steadier these days, his laugh less forced, his hands no longer twitching when he spoke. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked once, sitting with her on the porch swing as Talia chased a butterfly through the clover. Carolyn sipped her tea before answering. "I think about how quiet it was, how quiet I was, and how it never will be again." He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a photograph, Talia, holding a sign that read, "I am loved loudly." It was for a school project, but it meant more. Carolyn placed it on the mantel that night, beside the old photo of Ryan as a boy. End classed. June arrived later that week carrying a pitcher of homemade lemonade and an old deck of cards. "They're saying you might get nominated for the Governor's Housing Award," she said, pouring 2 glasses, "which, in my opinion, is long overdue." Carolyn raised her brow. "I didn't build this for awards." "No," June said. "You built it because nobody ever did it for you. And now? You're the one building the blueprint." They played rummy until the sun dipped behind the roofline, and the cicadas hummed like a string section warming up. End classed. As twilight wrapped the porch in amber, Carolyn placed a single sunflower in the vase beside the door, her own quiet ritual. Its yellow petals caught the last light, bold but soft, unshaken. It had become her symbol. Growth without noise. A phone buzzed from the table. Todd. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "You've inspired 3 more people to donate their homes. One's in Durham, 2 in Asheville." Carolyn didn't speak, just smiled as the fireflies began to dance across the lawn. "Ready to expand?" Todd asked. She looked around the porch, the garden, the house filled with second chances and first breaths. "I didn't take the house out of anger," she said finally, voice calm, certain. "I took it because silence doesn't mean surrender."